Awesome. Thanks for coming. In front of you is a little handout that as we go through the slides, just kind of see where we are on the handout, and we're going to do a lot of demonstration and self-assessment of range of motion or flexibility, strength and control.
That's those slides there.
This one?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so Dr. Taylor already did some introduction. I run 5Ks and 10Ks usually, not much longer than that, but I prefer trail running or obstacle course races like the Spartan or the Dirty Dash, like here in Albany. I've done several of those every year for 5 or 6 years now. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk about running. So preventing running injuries is really complicated. It's mostly due to training errors in volume or progressing your volume or intensity too fast. But there are some factors of range of motion, strength, endurance, and control of your body, particularly your foot, ankle, and knee, and to some extent the hip as well, that can contribute to that, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So some of the information is derived from research, some of it's from clinical experience, and some of it is from personal experience. So I'll try to identify what's what when we go through it. Okay, so I like to view running and training for running as a pyramid, and the foundation of it is flexibility, because if you don't have adequate flexibility, then you're going to struggle to perform an appropriate range of movement when you're running, and it just taxes your strength and endurance more than necessary. Then after you have appropriate flexibility, it's important to be strong enough to control your body. And then above that is the actual application of your strength, so controlling how your body moves and being conscious of your technique when you run. So not overstriding or understriding, not leaning forward too much, not being too far upright. And then on the very top, if you're interested in speed and endurance, that's where that comes in. So it's important because if you run a 5K and you're going to be running maybe 150 to 180 steps per minute, it comes out just mathematically to maybe a little bit over 2,000, maybe if you're running short strides, even up to 3,000 steps for a 3-mile race. And that's just a 3-mile run. Obviously more than that for the longer runs. So that's a lot of stress on the body. And if you're chronically running with maybe poor flexibility, then that could be an issue. It might be okay for just a mile or two, but if you're running 3-4 times a week or more, the steps really start to add up. So, as we sort of described earlier about flexibility, it's important to be flexible enough, and the most important flexibility components are really around the ankle and hip, but the knee to a certain extent as well. If you're just jogging at a moderate pace for short distances, it might not be that big of an issue, but if you want to run for longer or for faster or going up and down hills, then you're going to need a little bit more flexibility. Okay, so the first thing we talk about, one of the most important things, is how much your ankle can bend forward. We call it ankle dorsiflexion. So here is the knee to wall test, and as you can see here, this person can only get their toe maybe an inch or two from the wall before their heel starts to come up. And this person can get it maybe 4 or 5 inches. And it's just a nice, easy estimate instead of using an inclinometer or a goniometer to measure your ankle dorsiflexion. So, if you would, all stand up, find some wall space. And on the back of your instruction, or on the back of your handout, I hand-made a ruler because I meant to print it out on there, but I forgot. So there you go. So the goal here is to see how far away from the wall you can move your foot and still touch your knee to the wall without your heel coming up. Preferably with your shoes off if you don't want to do your shoes on. Or if you don't want to take them off, you can keep them on. So if we measure this with a goniometer or an inclinometer, anything less than 20-25 degrees definitely needs improvement. Between 25 and 35 is a good number. Anything more than 35 is great. That means you can probably do a nice full deep squat without really any calf tightness. So make sure that there might be a little ledge there. So.
Sorry, I was lost.
Oh, you're good. Here's a handout. We're barely into the first sort of section here. So we're measuring our ankle dorsiflexion motion. How's everybody looking there?
I think you need a longer ruler.
So Dr. Taylor has amazing dorsiflexion. So if you're going to be going up and down hills, you might want to be, more than 4 inches away from the wall. If you're less than 4 inches, you might think about incorporating some stretches before or after your runs or exercises.
Is that really long feet?
Yeah, it is an estimation. It's an estimation out of convenience because not many people own their own goniometer or inclinometer. Good. How's everybody doing?
So is the shoe going to make it harder or easier?
Well, if your shoe has a little heel rise, so if it's a positive drop, then it's going to make it a little easier. So it may be overestimating your dorsiflexion motion.
Dang.
We got Dave pretty good?
Dave's got like 9 inches.
Nice.
That was not as good.
Does anybody have any questions about this measurement?
If you support yourself like I was leaning on the table.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah, as long as your heel stays on the ground and you can touch your knee to the wall, then that's a good test.
So I could stand here and support myself.
Yeah. And if you're finding yourself inflexible in this measurement, then this test is also a good stretch for it. So you can do your calf stretch like that. You can do it off a step. On the sheet, there's a little picture there of a way to stretch it. Research says you should stretch things for a little bit more than 30 seconds, maybe even up to a minute or so, a few times to get long-term changes in your range of motion. Okay. Everybody have a good feel for that one now? Yeah. All right. So knee, thigh flexibility, quadriceps, hamstring flexibility isn't too important unless you're running really fast like that guy. He wins some races. So if you know who that is. Does anybody know who that is?
Paul, is that you?
I don't know his name. But
His name's
I
Mo?
think I recognize him.
Mo Farah? Yeah, Mo Farah, yeah. So if you're running really fast, or if you want to run really efficiently, in your swing phase, your heel and your knee flex way up here by your rear end. That keeps the moment arm really short as opposed to casting out. It just is more efficient. Of course, if you're just going for a little jog, you probably don't need to have your heels going that high. And in terms of your hamstring flexibility, you don't need to have too much more than at initial contact when it's out there, although it does help to be at least sufficiently flexible. In the clinic, if we lay on your back, maybe 70, 80 degrees, if 90 is vertical, is a good number. But in general, you should be able to touch your toes or get close to touching your toes. So here's some hamstring and quadriceps flexibility stretching. Again, maybe for this, if you can touch your heel to your rear end, that's good. If you can't, maybe you should work on it. It might not be that important though. Okay, hip extension. So when you're running, and you can see with Mo here, he's got a nice forward lean and maybe 10, 15 degrees of hip extension at toe off. And that's pretty good. You don't need too much more than that. A sprinter may need maybe 20 or 30 degrees. So one easy test is if you can step out from a wall 2 to 3 steps, maintain good posture, and move your leg backwards like the gentleman here. And you can still touch the wall without leaning forward. Then that's a pretty good indicator that you've got good hip extension range of motion. And then a way that if you feel like you don't have that, you can stretch it out. You can do a half kneeling hip flexor stretch or prone hip extension with a bent knee, because that, to a certain extent, if we can go back, sort of simulates this motion here when you need good hip extension. Anybody have any questions with hip extension or quadriceps flexibility or hamstring flexibility? Okay, good. Okay, any other questions about flexibility? So it's nice if you can get your toes close to 70, 90 degrees up in the air. You can put your toe up to a wall. Again, not sure if that's super important for most people. Okay, so strength after flexibility is important because you need sufficient strength and endurance of your muscles to help control your body on your running or on your run when running. Some of the more important muscles are your calves, your hips, your glutes, and then your quadriceps to help absorb the impact at initial contact. So we'll go through these. So calf strength endurance. The criteria during a single leg calf raise, you can use a finger for balance, but you should be able to do about 20 on each leg. Anything less than 20, you might want to work on that. 20 to 30 is pretty good for most people. And any more than 30 is great. Maybe you're an endurance runner who can do 10, 15, 20 miles with some hills. All right, so everybody, if you would, let's do the single leg heel raise. So don't push it too much. If you're not used to heel raises, you can be pretty sore after doing a max test like this. So you can use something to balance. Go at a nice, moderate pace, not too fast, not too slow. Maybe 2 or 3 seconds on the way up, 2 or 3 seconds on the way down. See if you can do more than 20. If you can do more than 20, you're pretty good. If you can do like 40, 45, then you're going to be sore tomorrow. And it means you've probably also been doing calf raises routinely. Yeah. See, good flexibility. Maybe strength is something to be worked on there. So in the clinic, when we do this test, we make sure you go at a nice even pace, and we make sure your ankle doesn't wobble inwards or outwards. So maybe if you have a full-length mirror, you can do it in the mirror and make sure you have good control over your ankle. And when you're rising up your ankle, your heel is not falling inwards or outwards. How'd everybody do? Pretty good? Everybody get 20?
Yeah. Switch legs.
Yeah, you gotta do the other leg. Yeah, that's good. I mean, if you didn't get 20, you don't have to say so, but you can if you want. Dr. Taylor got 300. I only thought he was going to get 200. Okay, good. Everybody's in their chair because the next one is the single leg sit to stand. So this is not only good strength exercise, it's a good control exercise to make sure your knee isn't wobbling too far inward or outward. So it's just a single leg squat from the chair. You can put your hands on your hips or across your chest, and you come up and down. So if you can do it 5 times, that's good. If you can do it maybe 10, 15, 20 times, that's great. If you're not as tall, it's easier. Again, this is just an estimation of strength. If you're really tall, like you're taller than 5'9" or 5'10", it's a little harder.
That's my strength.
You can't even do it. Over the.
So hopefully one of the takeaways from today's talk is that you can identify some strengths and weaknesses.
Way.
Obviously the weaknesses are stuff that you can work on.
No way. Maybe if I try to jump a little.
When
start with both legs.
does eventually your thigh quit? Like I can feel it moving around. It's easy to do, but it's
Yeah. So as you get stronger, it's going to make the control easier. And as you just practice it, the control gets easier because you make a conscious effort not to let your knee go in and out. Yeah.
Okay, that looks like what I'm going to have to do.
All right. Good. So we have something already. A little bit of core strength. Most of it is maybe thigh and hip strength. Yeah.
Short breath now.
I ride the bicycle all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I've ridden 170 miles in 11 hours.
Wow. So you've got
So I
good
should.
endurance. Yeah.
Shouldn't I have good strength there?
So for one, it's just a strength estimate, but also strength is very specific. So your strength in the muscles and the control that it takes to pedal a bike is probably really well developed.
Yeah,
But
that isn't the quad something you use on the?
yeah, so it's different because it's under your body weight and it's not just however much force. So I don't know, you're probably not pushing your body weight with every pedal stroke for 170 miles. So again, it's an estimation of strength, not as much endurance. So that's one way to explain that.
So if I want to improve it, I just got to keep trying.
Yeah, keep practicing. So you can start with maybe a pillow, like a couch pillow on a chair to raise it up maybe an inch or two. And that can allow you to do maybe
Okay,
5, 10,
that
15
makes
repetitions. Yeah. Now the side plank, you don't have to get down on the floor. I don't know if there's enough room for everybody to do a side plank, but you certainly can do it at home tonight. But typically, anything less than 30 seconds for a side plank may mean that you should work on it a little bit. And then the advanced version is that one below. If you really want to challenge your hip strength and endurance, the one-legged side plank, and the goal there would be maybe greater than 30 seconds. Does anybody want to demonstrate? Okay, maybe later. It's pretty self-explanatory. You're just supporting yourself on your ankles, feet, and maybe even the bottom part of your shin there, and then on your forearm. Okay. So this is called the Bunkie test, and it's a test designed for high-level endurance athletes. And it's a series of these 5 positions that you're trying to hold for about 30 to 40 seconds. At least that's the way the test was written originally, but research has shown that this one right here, most even very fit individuals hold it for about 20 or 30 seconds before they fail. So the goal for each one of those positions is to hold it for 30 to 40 seconds, except for that last one, because that one's really tough.
Those last 2 look tough.
Yeah. And this isn't on your handout, but we can give a link to the PowerPoint, I think, via our website or something like that. Does anybody have any questions so far about these? Okay. Take that as a no. All right, balance. Obviously, when you're running, you're on one foot. And so it's good to have good control of your body while you're on one foot. Typically, it's nice if you can hold your one-footed balance, your single leg stance, for more than 15 seconds. But the question is, how important is it really when you're running? You're really only on one foot for maybe 200 milliseconds or so less than half of a second. So basically what I'm trying to say is balance may be important, but controlling your body when you're moving, like during a lunge, is more important. Which brings me to the next point, which is controlling your body and the technique of running. So when you're moving, your control is influenced by your flexibility, your strength, and just your ability to coordinate your movements. So during a lunge, if you can do a walking lunge or a stationary lunge at home, maybe down a hallway, in front of a mirror is best, preferable. Try to see if you can do your lunge without letting your knee collapse inwards or outwards. Again, sometimes if the gluteal muscles aren't quite strong enough, that knee tends to fall inwards. And then when you're running, same concept. This runner has a nice level pelvis because her hips seem to be adequately strong. Maybe she has good enough dorsiflexion so that it's not compensating by falling inwards or overpronating, which typically forces that knee to come in and the thigh to rotate inwards a little bit. Versus this runner here, who maybe this hip isn't strong enough, so it's allowing her pelvis to drop when she's in this single leg stance. Her foot looks like it's in pretty good alignment, so that pronation doesn't seem to be affecting that too much. So when you're running or exercising, try to, don't just go through the repetitions of the exercise, but control your body, because that can translate over to how you run. So the technique of running, you want to have a slight forward lean. You want to have a small vertical oscillation. The bigger you sort of bounce up and down, the less efficient you are, and the more stress it puts through your lower body with each step when you land. And then you want to have some lateral and rotational movements. Small, you don't want to be, flailing out everywhere, but you also don't want to run super rigid and stiff either. You want your body to sort of flow through the movements. It allows your momentum to transfer from one foot to the other. Oh, does anybody have any questions about control in the first slide of technique? Okay. So foot contact is an interesting concept. Research has shown that if you keep your step rate between 160 and 180 steps per minute, it seems to reduce the load on your ankles and knees. Typically, when your step rate is a little slower, it's because you're taking too long of steps, and your foot contact is way out here, as opposed to being closer under your center of mass. So you want to avoid excessive crossover, so where your foot contacts shouldn't be too far under your body. It should be maybe just under a little bit, but slightly outwards. And the way it's typically described is one foot should have slight overlap with the other. As you kind of see from this, there's just a slight overlap. So you're not too wide, but you're not too narrow. This is an example of somebody who's crossed over a little bit too much. Sometimes that can just put a little too much strain on the gluteal tendons, or maybe even where the IT band inserts there at the knee. And then an interesting sort of topic that's sort of been bouncing around over the last 10, 15 years is how you should be landing. Is it on your rear foot, your mid foot, or your forefoot? And minimalist shoes have come out, which sort of they tend to have people land less rear foot and more of a midfoot. So some research here not too long ago looked at pretty high-level runners and found that most of them use more of a rear foot or a midfoot strike. The forefoot strike puts more pressure on the calf and is a little less efficient, typically because it doesn't take advantage of some of the passive structures. You're sacrificing muscular effort for more stiff tissues like the plantar fascia and the Achilles tendon. When it's nice and stiff, can help transfer energy a little bit more efficiently. So 75% of elite half marathoners run using the rear foot, 23% midfoot, and a very small percent with a forefoot strike. But if you're going to be sprinting anywhere, you're going to be probably on your mid to forefoot. It's just a little less metabolically efficient. In general, whatever foot strike you choose, make sure you're not crossing over too much, and make sure it's underneath your center of mass. And if you can, via a Fitbit or some sort of watch, you can monitor your step rate, shooting for 160 to 180 steps per minute. Another easy way to do it, I think it's there on the slide, there, just count your steps on, say, your right leg for 30 seconds. And if you're between 40 and 60, that should put you in to that 160 to 180 steps per minute category. Because if you're at 40, that really means you're 80 per leg in 30 seconds, which is 160 in a minute. Just in case, math isn't like your strong suit. Mental math is not my strong suit. So I had to do that all on a calculator, believe it or not. NASA was never in the cards for me. So, okay. To summarize, you need to have at least adequate flexibility. If you're on level surfaces, you don't need to be super flexible. If you want to go up and down hills or just run with a greater volume, it probably helps to be a little bit more flexible. You need to have sufficient strength to control your body. Again, if you're going on uneven surfaces, up and down hilly trails, you probably need to be a little bit stronger. You need to use that strength to control your body, and that usually just comes through practice. And then on top of that, speed and endurance is just mastering those other three things and doing it faster for longer. So some practical advice: if you found anything today you're a little bit weak at or a little bit inflexible with, warm up before you run. Maybe do some heel raises, jog, back pedal, do some side shuffling, and then stretch the things out that are a little bit tight. And then go for your run. Pay attention to your form and technique, your step rate. And then after your run, maybe do your heel raises or your squats. the things that may be fatiguing that you're weak at to try to get them a little bit stronger. I wouldn't recommend doing a bunch of heel raises or single leg squats before you go for a run. You don't want to fatigue those muscles that are important in controlling your technique. That's it. Okay. That wasn't bad. Half hour? A little less than a half hour? I was worried it was 18 slides, but I tend to go faster. So, all right, does anybody have any questions about anything? So look through your handout. Maybe circle or write down where you fall on those. Originally, I was going to give you a score. Poor would be a 0, good would be a 1, great would be a 2 on all those categories. But I didn't want to make anybody feel too good about themselves or too bad. So feel free to do that if you'd like. Give yourself a flexibility score, a balance and control score, and a strength score. See where your weak areas are and work on them. And again, the caveat to this is you can still probably run perfectly fine, even if you have some deficits. But maybe it increases your risk of getting, plantar fasciitis, or having some Achilles tendon pain, or some lateral hip pain or knee pain. Okay. Any questions?
You had mentioned doing stretches. Can you maybe elaborate, like what are good stretching techniques and bad stretching techniques?
Yeah, so I don't like to assign good or bad, but say before your run, you want to do a dynamic stretching where you're not necessarily holding a stretch for like 30 seconds to a minute before your run. That may impair your performance a little bit. Maybe you just do like a walking quad. So if you have tight quads, like you can't get your heel all the way to your rear end, maybe you just do a walking high heel quad stretch. Maybe you try to do a little bit of a dynamic stretch like that. If your hamstrings are tight, maybe it's a straight-legged march or sort of the rocket kick or a walking hamstring stretch like so. If you want to make long-term changes in your range of motion, you might need to hold the stretches for a little bit longer. Again, I recommend doing those either after a run or on a different day after you've warmed up thoroughly. I wouldn't recommend bouncing through your stretches. I don't think that's really a thing anymore. I think all the textbooks that we read in undergrad, that recommended that, it was all kind of a foreign ballistic stretching technique that I think was more popular in like the 60s or 70s, something like that. But so maybe not vigorous bouncing. Yeah, does that answer your question? Any other? So there's more advanced stretching techniques like contract, relax, where you contract a muscle and then you relax it and stretch it, or you contract its opposing muscle and then stretch it afterwards. I can talk more about that if anybody wants to. Or
I would reiterate the dynamic stretch. That's really what all the recommendations are these days. So gone are the days of bend down, hold 30 seconds, or do the 1, 2, 3 up. I remember when I was a kid. So a dynamic stretch. People ask me that all the time. That's if you're gonna do like a hard run, do a mild jog beforehand with some high knees, some butt kicks, things like that. That's really the main way of warming up and stretching.
I'm curious about, I hate to exercise, lift weights and do these kind of things.
yeah.
How much, if you're just running or bicycling, if you do a lot of it, doesn't that eventually develop the muscles?
It'll develop them very specific to the activity, and the worry there that if you only do a couple different things is that if your technique is maybe you're lacking a little bit of hip extension, then you're never really going to adequately develop that full range of motion. So sometimes doing some of these stretches or exercises can help supplement that.
I guess my thought was that I went back to my childhood when I baled hay and did a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to, when they had football practice, I was the only guy in shape.
Yeah.
because I was standing on that wagon, tossing hay around. I mean, that was pretty good all-around exercise.
Yeah. And there is some general, if you're exercising against resistance, whether it's a dumbbell, barbell, or a hay bale, that gets you strong, and that has carryover to things like football or cycling or running.
You're riding on that wagon and bouncing around.
Yeah. And the other caveat there is that when you're young, you can get away with a lot, you know, because you can go from never running to running a couple miles, and maybe you're a little bit sore the day after, but then in 2 days you're fine. Where, you know, when you're deep into your 30s, you know, it's a different story.
I was gonna add, again, going back to like what Mike Johnson was talking about the first week, what's your goal? So if your goal is just to be able to ride bike longer, harder, faster, then great. But if your goal is, you know, strength, stability, longevity, general health, then you're gonna wanna mix up the types of exercises you're gonna do. If you wanna prevent falls, you're gonna wanna work on balance. You're just gonna wanna do lots of different things to make sure that you get all these other muscle groups that do contribute. So biking forever, hey, that's great if that's your goal, but if it's other things that are your goal, then involving other muscle groups and cross-training would be ideal.
My goal is to reach 150. Don't laugh, I'm being serious. I used to joke about it, but I have decided I'm just gonna make that a serious goal.
There you go.
Any other questions or questions on the handout there? So there is some in the how to improve column, some basic instructions on how to help with each one of those components.
Can you go back to that bunkie?
Yeah.
Sure. So is that
Anybody's
very last
brave
one?
enough to try the bunkie.
No, I didn't say that. Is that last one, she's weight bearing on the...
On the top leg, yeah. So it's an adductor exercise, and yeah, and usually when I start people off on an exercise like this, we start with this bottom leg bent and the cushion and support under the knee, because it does put a lot of stress on that medial knee. Yeah, and this leg is actually just kind of floating. It's not
Stress
pinching.
on the lower knee?
On the medial side, yeah. I meant to say
Right
this
inside of the knee.
this part of the upper knee there. Yeah.
And the adductor is the inside of the leg.
Yeah, that just looks painful.
Inside.
It is.
Are those, like I work strength training, are those machines that work like the inner and outer, is that good? Is that good to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's it probably can't hurt. It probably gets things stronger a little bit, but it's best to do things maybe under the weight of your body if you want to transfer over to an activity where you're trying to control your own body weight. But
So like
probably
the free weights and stuff like I do.
yeah. You know, we do in the clinic a lot of resistance band sidestepping because you're kind of under the weight of your own body, just with a little added resistance. We do side planks and things like that to help people, you know, rehabilitate from knee
I
and hip
noticed the
problems.
side plank I was not strong on.
Yeah.
Stuff you can do without any significant equipment.
Yeah. I tried to make all of these stretches and exercises methods that are pretty convenient for everybody. So yeah, you don't need a squat machine or to put a barbell on your back or hold a pair of dumbbells to do, you know, squats. Most people are just a single leg squat, you know, 2 to 3 sets of 5 to 15 repetitions. That's a pretty good workout.